it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church.
Recently, the Vice President of the United States made one of the most outrageous statements I've ever heard from a Catholic politician, and honestly, it's quite shocking. This is someone who has built a reputation as a balanced and measured figure, not known for extreme or reckless takes throughout his career, and yet, here we are. So before I say anything else, listen carefully to what he just said about what Pope Leo should do. Let's listen.
We certainly have a good relationship with the Vatican, but we're also going to disagree on substantive questions from time to time. I think that's a totally reasonable thing. I certainly think that in some cases, it would be best for the Vatican to stick to matters of morality, to stick to matters of what's going on in the Catholic Church, and let the President of the United States stick to dictating American public policy.
Now, when you strip away all the rhetoric, what J.D. Vance is really arguing is that the Pope should be confined to a very narrow and artificial role, limited to what people casually call church matters, kept away from the messy realities of global conflict, and basically silenced when it comes to issues between nations. But the entire argument falls apart the moment you recognize a simple truth. The killing of innocent people in an unprovoked war is not just a political issue. It is at its core a moral issue, and not just any moral issue, but one of the most serious ones possible, because when life and death are involved, you're dealing with the highest stakes imaginable, which means the Pope doesn't just have the right to speak, he has a duty to speak. And yet, what we are seeing is that many American politicians, including J.D. Vance, are twisting the Pope's call for peace as if he is intervening in US foreign policy. But think about it like this. It is like a doctor in an emergency room watching a patient bleed out and urgently saying, "Stop the bleeding now." And then someone else accuses the doctor of overstepping and trying to run the hospital. That completely misses the point, because the doctor isn't making administrative decisions. He's simply stating what needs to be done to save a life. So in light of that reasoning, let's listen to Bishop Barron as he explains why the clergy must speak when politics intersects with moral truth. Let's listen.
They found Catholics view religious organizations as forces for good in society. However, a clear majority say that churches and other religious organizations should keep out of politics. They found 62% say that U.S. churches and other houses of worship should keep out of politics, and 3/4 of U.S. Catholics say churches should not endorse candidates seeking elected office. What's your take on that?
Well, I agree with that last part, of course, and the bishops have been saying that for a long time. It's never appropriate for a priest or a bishop to get up during election season and say, Catholics must vote for this candidate, or it's sinful to vote for that candidate. That would be inappropriate. Now, the other side, though, is too strong. See, part of the problem, Brandon, is the question often on these polls is so vaguely worded, Because if you say, well, religion's got nothing to do with politics, that's just silly, because religion is a way of talking about the world, about God, about objective moral value. Well, of course that informs your political judgments. We're not talking about, let's formulate a law to compel people to go to Sunday Mass. We're not talking about that. That would indeed be an overstepping of one's religious prerogatives. But that your religious views on ethical matters, on objective moral value, on the nature of society, don't affect your political point of view? Of course not. Of course they do. And of course religious people bring that to the table when they consider candidates for office. So the problem is, what do you mean precisely when you say, well, religion should have nothing to do with politics? We don't impose our liturgical practice, there's an example, nor do we get up in the pulpit and say, well, you must vote for, X, Y, or Z. But religion informing one's political judgments, absolutely. So I have no quarrel whatsoever with a bishop or a priest talking about those great principles. So go to a statement like the bishop's statement on faithful citizenship, on forming conscience for faithful citizenship, that goes through the whole range of issues that are of interest to the political situation today. Fine, talk about all of those. Whether it's abortion, whether it's protection for the environment, whether it's care for the poor, whether it's euthanasia, whether it's the traditional marriage, the church has a view on all those things. Talk about them, defend them, speak out of the Catholic tradition. But then we've got to leave the particular judgment, it seems to me, up to the individual. I'm not there, As Pope Francis said, not to supplant someone's conscience, but to inform someone's conscience. So the church has an obligation, of course, to inform people's consciences in the political order. So go through the range of issues, look at that statement on faithful citizenship, and you'll find this wonderful, rich complexity of Catholic social teaching, which is neither left nor right. That, it seems to me, is perfectly not only valid, that's called for.
As Bishop Barron explains very clearly, there is an important distinction that many people either miss or deliberately blur. Bishops and priests are not meant to tell Catholics which political party to vote for, which politician they must support, or which exact policy they have to agree with, because those decisions belong to the well-formed conscience of each individual believer. But at the same time, Catholic priests have a real responsibility to speak about moral truth, and those truths will naturally shape how people think, what they believe, and even how they vote. So just because a priest is speaking about something that has political consequences, it does not mean he's being political in a partisan sense. It simply means he's doing his job of proclaiming what is right and what is wrong. To make this even clearer, take the issue of abortion, which is one of the most politically charged topics in the United States. Catholic priests continue to speak about it because they recognize it as a grave moral evil involving the taking of innocent human life. And the fact that it is politically controversial does not remove their responsibility to address it. So to say that clergy should stay silent just because moral issues intersect with politics is not only unreasonable, but actually misleading, because it removes Catholic teaching from the public square. And this leads to a very important distinction, the difference between principle and prudence, which Bishop Barron explains in the next clip.
Another important distinction, Brandon, we've made it implicitly, but between principle and prudence. So principle, the great moral values involved. For example, that the unborn are to be protected. Absolutely, that's one of the great principles, that we never directly attack the life of an innocent. That's an absolute moral principle. There's no debating that. That the poor should be cared for. Of course, that's a great principle. We have a preferential option for the poor. It's essential to Catholic teaching. But in that second case, is there a distinction between the principle, care for the poor, and the prudential judgment? Well, how best to do that? So let's say you've got a Democrat and a Republican, Catholics. They both agree caring for the poor is a supreme moral value. All right, good. Now, how do we do that? And the liberal Democrat might say, well, I think through these social programs and this and that. The conservative Republican might say, yeah, we've tried those, they haven't worked. I think enterprise zones within economically depressed parts of cities is a better way to go. Fine. Have a debate at the level of prudence. And the church, mind you, should not get involved in that discussion qua church. Now, might I, for example, Robert Barron, have an opinion about that? Sure, I'm a citizen of the country. I can have an opinion about, well, what's the best way to address this issue? But the church, so now as Bishop Barron, my job is not to say, oh yeah, and by the way, that piece of legislation here, that should be favored, or no, don't go that route. No, that's descending too much into the realm of prudential judgment, where it's the laity. That's where the laity, I think, have a real primacy.
Once again, as Bishop Barron explains, Catholics, especially clergy, are called to operate primarily at the level of principle, which means clearly stating moral truth and explaining the deeper moral reality behind the issue. But once that foundation is set, it then becomes the role of political leaders, policymakers, and citizens to debate the prudential means, that is, the practical ways those moral principles are applied to real life. This is why clergy should not normally get involved in detailed policy making or partisan debates, even though they may have personal opinions on those matters. And importantly, this distinction is not something new or convenient. It has always been part of Catholic tradition. For example, Thomas Aquinas clearly distinguished between universal moral principles which apply to everyone and their application in specific situations, which can vary depending on the context. Similarly, St. Augustine spoke about justice and peace in society without trying to dictate every political arrangement. And in more recent times, St. Pope John Paul II also emphasized that while the Church teaches moral principles clearly, it allows room for legitimate disagreement in how those principles are applied in political life. To make this more practical, imagine a large apartment complex where the drainage system is completely broken down, and now you have stagnant water sitting there, smelling, attracting insects, and slowly becoming an health hazard. In that situation, what is the role of the priest? Well, the priest can step in and say, Human beings are meant to live in dignity, not in filth, and allowing that kind of environment to continue is harmful and unacceptable. That is the level of principle. But the next question is, who fixes it? Do you hire one company or another? Do you redesign the system or just clean it out? How much do you spend and how quickly do you act? Those are practical decisions, and that's where the priest steps back, because that is the level of prudence. Now apply that same logic to what is happening in the Iran war. The Pope has clearly remained at the level of principle and has not stepped into the realm of prudence, because all he has said is that killing innocent people can never be justified and that all parties involved should seek peace. So in conclusion, I would say that J.D. Vance should take the time to better understand the Catholic faith before lecturing others on what the Pope should or should not say or do. He should stay in his lane. I hope this video is helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.